The People's Republic of China is a state of enforced amnesia. In other words, history gets rewritten constantly. This constant purging, rewriting of the past. It's quite Orwellian, really.
There's something special that you have to deal with if you grow up in an authoritarian regime like me. Eventually, at some point of your life, you will discover the real history of your own country. You have to face the fact that you've been lied to your entire life. I don't know how many people on this earth would understand how that feels. In this video, the brilliant historian Frank Dikötter, he completely debunked some of the foundational lies that the Chinese Communist Party used effectively to brainwash its own citizens, myself included. But here is the most important part. The CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, could have never done it without the help of people like you, people outside China, people who didn't grow up in China. It happened in the past, and it's happening again right now. My name is Lu, and I was born and raised in China. Please remember to hit subscribe and turn on that notification, otherwise you won't likely to see me again. Let's get into it.
This title is obviously a nod to Edgar Snow's book, Red Star Over China. How much of what we think we know about China's revolution traces to that one book?
That would be very difficult to say, but it's not even the starting point. So from the moment some 12 chaps get together in a room in Shanghai 1921, which marks the foundation of the Chinese Communist Party, there is, of course, projection of an image, but Edgar Snow, journalist from Missouri, arrives very much at a low point in the history of the Chinese Communist Party in 1936. This is 15 years after the foundation. At that particular point in time, the Communist Party in China, which has a population of about 500 million people, has 40,000 followers. It's an extremely small number of people. They're about the same relevance as a provincial band of bandits, so to speak. They've got very little resonance. In fact, after what is referred to as the Long March, they've reached a dead end.
Okay, there's a lot of information to unpack here. So first of all, when he described that image of 12 people starting this meeting in a small room, that is an image that every Chinese student knows. Consider it the equivalence of our Mayflower story. And just to give you an understanding of how small they were compared against 500 million of population, they had 0.008% of the population as Communist Party members. So that is a very small representation. But in my memory, or this memory that was induced by the Chinese Communist Party's compulsory education, I guess, I don't know, in my memory it was bigger. I never thought that the Chinese Communist Party was some sort of fringe party that had very little impact. So this is very eye-opening to me.
Edgar Snow comes in and is used as a mouthpiece by the party. And his book, Red Star Over China, is published in 1937, translated in many languages, really puts Mao Zedong and the Chinese Communists on the map, really projects an image of not so much communists, but real, true social reformers in tune with the spirit of the modern age.
In the beginning, the professor said the history was rewritten repeatedly over and over again. So every few generations, we get a different version of what really happened. And when it comes to the case of Edgar Snow, the American journalist, I didn't grow up learning about him, but right now his book, Red Star Over China, is not just an optional historical context. It is a mandatory reading requirement in the national middle school curriculum. So if you go to school in China and all the education is controlled by the Chinese Communist Party because they're the only party there, if you're an 8th grade student, you probably have read this book. The West has always played a very important role in connecting and helping communism thrive outside of these regimes. Because I think the rest of the world constantly romanticized the idea of communism And this is often based on their dissatisfaction of capitalism itself and their ignorance of what really communism is. And I'm seeing that more and more among the younger generation in the West.
People who will bring these hundreds of millions of people in China into the modern world, a world which in China is marred by imperialism, feudalism. From there onwards, that story is, of course, replicated time and again. 1949, red flag goes up over the Forbidden City. A quarter of humanity becomes communist. From there onwards, it becomes official propaganda to this very day.
So the Chinese Communist Party has always understood what type of people to target. They've always understood who to pick. At first, I thought it was a modern thing, but it's not. It apparently traces back to when Mao was still alive. And it's often these individuals who have an immense amount of power in the public space. This American journalist, he's probably the archetype of people that are often referred to as the old friend or good friend of the Chinese Communist Party. It is a covert language that the Chinese Communist Party used to address people who've made great contribution to the rise of the Chinese Communist Party. And I could sympathize with people like Edgar Snow, right? You're a journalist, you get this big story, this exclusive, you get to talk to Mao Zedong, this leader of this up-and-coming political party with a very naughty original idea of communism. And I think China often seizes opportunity like this. Another example that I could give you is Hasan Piker. He apparently is a left-leaning pundit and he has a lot of power on social media, he has a lot of followers, and he has an ego, right? Who doesn't? So he's got to go to China and act as if he was this kind of bridge between communism and the outside world. This is a pattern. This is something that happens over and over again in history, and it's just sad to witness.
Big takeaway from the book was the improbability of this whole thing. It just struck me reading the book that it's 1936. They have roughly the same appeal as an obscure religious sect, but put it into perspective for our listeners about Mao and his collective group, maybe 25 to 50 people that were able to project this level of power and also this preconceived destiny for them.
It's fascinating because, of course, the image that has been reproduced time and again is one of a communist party fighting against a nationalist party under Chiang Kai-shek for supremacy throughout the 1930s. It implies a sort of equivalence which is simply not there. The reality is that from the very beginning, 1921, the communists failed to really appeal to any particular social category, whether these are workers in cities or, most of all, of course, villagers in the countryside. They're referred to by the communists as peasants.
I grew up believing, and I'm not the only one, most of us grew up believing that the Communist Party is the party of the people. That's their brand, right? There's state-backed TV shows that depicted a very different picture. When we talk about collective enforced amnesia, we're talking about compulsory education, falsified textbooks that you're forced to memorize, and also TV shows that really warp history. I never thought that the Communist Party didn't have the support of the people. I thought that was their whole story, was that the Nationalist Party is evil and they betrayed their own people, which laid foundation for the Chinese Communist Party, because it's truly a party that speaks to peasants, speaks to villagers.
How do the communists in Moscow help them? Tell us about that.
Very clearly, very rapidly, agents sent by the Communist International, Comintern, realize that this has very little popular appeal. So what happens is that another party, keen on uniting this country, which is fragmented after the fall of the empire in 1911, called the Nationalists. The Nationalists also seek weapons from pretty much anywhere, and Moscow offers it to them on the condition that they allow Communist Party members inside the ranks of the Nationalist Party. In other words, it's like a Trojan horse. The Nationalists believe they can control it. So money from Moscow flows to the Nationalist Party.
I can see why that side of the story was never shared with the public, how Moscow paid Mao's way basically to his power. In an authoritarian regime, you often need to create this conflict between us versus them. And as I've shared in my previous videos, whenever there's a conflict that they cannot solve, they always pawn it on to a foreigner. Now, if the Chinese citizens who have been brainwashed by this narrative learned that the very party that is selling this kind of narrative itself is in fact funded by a foreign country, their whole ideology would just collapse because you're doing the exact same thing that you're accusing other people of doing.
By 1926, when the Nationalist Army starts moving up north and unites that country by force, in effect, the Russians are in control of an army. Not only that, but the communists go on the rampage as this army moves up north. They incite people to attack any foreigner seen as agents of imperialism, attack landlords, shopkeepers, you name it. It's absolute mayhem, to the point that the nationalists stop that united front, expel Communist Party members. So they're pretty much lost by 1927. So time and again, Stalin intervenes. So what you do have is a number of people, including the central government, which realizes that the Soviets are out there to build up an army and overthrow them. The Communist International, established by Lenin in 1919, is there to promote revolution worldwide and overthrow the so capitalist class.
For a second, I couldn't tell if he was describing what happened in China back then or what's happening right now. Whenever there's a collective dissatisfaction of capitalism, that's when people who are power hungry see an opportunity. Their way of doing it is they're trying to demonize their opponents and saying that they're landlords, they're capitalists, they're evil, they deserve to die. Communism was never about villagers. It was about a few dictators who wanted more power.
Stalin decides to intervene militarily in 1929. So an actual Sino-Soviet war with, now think Ukraine, we're talking hundreds of thousands of troops, aircraft, gunboats, towns flattened. So time and again, Stalin intervenes. In fact, we were talking about 1936. Again, Stalin comes up with a new message. He tells this ragtag army of guerrilla fighters who amount no more than 40,000, he tells Mao Zedong, you should be fighting the Japanese. The Japanese are the one who start really taking over large parts of territory, including Manchuria from 1931 onwards.
I don't know how to describe my feeling right now, but this is the whole premise of their legitimacy. A story that they keep telling their own citizens over and over again. We earned this place because we fought off the Japanese army for you. That's why you were able to live in a peaceful time without wars. They acted as if they were some sort of saviors that acted selflessly, that wanted to protect the country. Now, not only that's not true, the Nationalist Party fought off the Japanese people, but it sounds like the Chinese Communist Party was the greedy one. They didn't want to fight the Japanese until they were told to.